What were the issues in McTominay's game before Ten Hag, how Ten Hag used his tactical system to get the best out of McTominay, how good could he get, and what past United players could we compare to McTominay to try to identify what his future role at Manchester United will be. But before I get into that, I have got a special announcement from the sponsors of today's video, OneFootball, which is now the place where on a Saturday night, if you're in the UK or Ireland, you can watch one free Italian Serie A game each weekend. As well as this, you can also use all the other football features that I've spoken about before with OneFootball. So if you are interested in watching European football, but just don't have anywhere to watch it, then you can go to the competition page linked in the description, and you can check out the free match that will be streamed this weekend. You can also watch highlights of all the Serie A games, and near live instant clips as well whilst the games are going on. And by downloading the OneFootball app, you will be helping to support the channel. So pre-Eric Ten Hag, Scott McTominay was seen as a squad player at best, and at worst, not even a United player. If you look at his performances from the past 2 to 3 seasons, I don't think it's even a stretch to say that he was a bottom-end Premier League level player, who wouldn't have walked into many first 11s in the Premier League. However, after a poor first game of the season at Brighton and a second half against Brentford, McTominay has not just picked up form but seemingly transformed into a completely different player. But how has he done this, or should I say how has Ten Hag done this? Well, before we analyse McTominay's transformation, let's identify what issues there were in his game prior to his recent turnaround. Well, just by watching McTominay over the past few years, it was clear that he was a rather limited player and didn't really specialise in anything in particular. He certainly wasn't a deep line playmaker, not having the necessary vision or passing range to be able to provide those progressive passes from deep. For this reason, along with his lack of press resistance, he wasn't capable of playing in that deep single pivot position as a regista, being a target for sides pressing high because of his clunkiness on the ball under pressure, which would have made him a sitting duck for the opposition's counter press. Now, if he wasn't a deep line playmaker, then he certainly wasn't a roaming playmaker either, which is a central midfielder who, while still being a playmaker of the side, tends to push further forward and get into advanced positions, think Paul Pogba or Frankie de Jong. So if he isn't a creative central midfielder, he must surely be a defensive-minded midfielder. Well, not really either. He without doubt was more industrious than he was creative, but I wouldn't have categorised him as a ball winner either, certainly at the top level, as he didn't have the assertiveness or the tackling technique to motor across the pitch and break up opposition attacks in the same way that we see players like Fabinho, Kante, Højbjerg and Bissouma do. I wouldn't say his defensive positioning was bad, but it certainly didn't make up for his other weaknesses either. At this point, he probably fell into the category of a box-to-box midfielder who was a bit of a jack of all trades and a master of none. It also didn't help that he was partnered alongside Fred, who had a lot of the same defensive and creative deficiencies as McTominay, with the Brazilian also not providing the forward or incisive passing from deep positions, and not being the type of player to dominate the midfield by winning the ball back, and in my opinion being a lot more of a liability in that area than McTominay, often being caught flat-footed with poor body positioning when confronting players who were looking to drive through the centre of the pitch, leading to him getting beat quite regularly, as seen as, according to his FBref report, Fred ranks in the 10th percentile for dribbles passed and the 26th percentile for percentage of dribblers tackled, showing that defending one-on-ones in the middle of the pitch is not one of Fred's strong points. This inability to stop players carrying the ball through the centre of the pitch would leave the whole United midfield open and the backline exposed, which with slow and unagile Harry Maguire in the centre of defence was a recipe for defensive disaster. So McTominay and also Fred weren't really in the team to break up play, nor were they there to progress the ball from deep positions. So why exactly were they in the team at all? Well, that's a question a lot of United fans were asking for quite a while, and the answer simply was that United didn't have any other options. But it can't just be that simplistic. Even before his sudden resurgence, McTominay has to have offered something to the side. But if we delve into his FBref report, we can get a better idea of what his attributes actually are. So when compared against every other midfielder in Europe's top 5 leagues over the past 365 days, McTominay ranked in the 80th, 77th and 75th percentiles respectively for dribbles completed, players dribbled past and carries into the final third, whilst also sitting in the 91st percentile for his dribble success rate, showing that despite lacking that progressive passing ability from that central midfield position, McTominay is surprisingly good at driving the ball forward with it at his feet. From a defensive point of view, McTominay ranks in the 91st percentile for his defensive goal creating actions and his percentage of dribblers tackled, the 88th for dribblers tackled and the 78th for tackles in the defensive third, which is actually surprisingly impressive and leads me to think that actually McTominay may have been looking far worse from a defensive point of view because he was partnered alongside Fred, who because of his defensive inabilities exposed a lot more space around McTominay, therefore making it seem like the Scottish international was the main reason for United's midfield being regularly exposed. But when we look at McTominay under Ten Hag this season, we can see these defensive qualities a lot more prominently. In the game against Leicester, McTominay played a pretty simple game, breaking up the play mostly in United's defensive third and around the box, and in possession he would look to recycle the ball with quick sideways or backwards passes to keep the play moving, whilst it was Christian Eriksen who would carry the burden of playing the forward incisive passes to progress the attack. Now alongside Fred in United's double pivot, this simple and non-penetrative passing would be an issue, as unlike Eriksen, Fred, like McTominay, doesn't play those system splitting passes that are required to move the attack forward quickly, and so that is why United struggle to break down deep defensive units with McFred in the midfield over the past few seasons, highlighting both Fred and McTominay's weaknesses a lot more than when they play alongside a more creative passer like Eriksen. Against Arsenal, McTominay once again was very good at keeping things simple, recycling the ball quickly after receiving it, but probably also had his best game in terms of breaking up the play in the middle third and higher up the pitch, being a physical presence, jumping in to make interceptions, and he put in a fantastic standing tackle on Gabriel Jesus in the first half on the edge of Arsenal's defensive third, which not only completely stopped Arsenal's counter-attack, but also enabled United to regain possession high up the pitch and sustain the pressure on Arsenal's defence. If you watched my analysis of the game, which will be linked in the description, you'll see that I was particularly impressed with the press resistance and forward passing that McTominay showed. There were also a number of different times when he received the ball off the back line in the middle third of his back to goal, with one of the Arsenal forwards applying pressure to him immediately. Now usually you would expect to see McTominay panic in this position, get caught taking too many touches, or simply play a simple but non-progressive pass backwards or sideways. However, I was pleasantly surprised to see him swivel after receiving the ball, wriggling away from the pressing player before finding a forward pass into either Rashford or Fernandes between the lines. And the reason this is such a valuable skill to have in a central midfielder is it allows United to progress the ball from in front of the opposition's midfield line to in behind them. And I would argue that this is the fundamental key to being able to break down a deep defensive unit. I would say that the Arsenal game was McTominay's most impressive performance so far this season, and it was because of this on-the-ball ability that he added to his game. I think whereas before the role that McTominay played was hard to pin down, probably being most comparable to a box-to-box midfielder, I would say that in this United side he is now firmly a ball-winning midfielder. Or if you wanted a bit more of a specific name, I would refer to him as an anchorman, a player who sits behind the play when his side have the ball, keeping it simple in possession the majority of the time, but out of possession being like a guard dog, shuttling across the pitch to put in tackles and make interceptions to break up opposition attacks, as he did so brilliantly against Arsenal. I do think that an optimistic development path for McTominay would lead him to potentially becoming a regista, capable of playing as a single pivot at the base of the midfield, as Rodri does for Manchester City, using his press resistance to play out of aggressive presses in the build-up phase, having the forward passing and vision to move the ball into players in advanced positions, while still utilising the physicality and defensive attributes that he already has in his game. Although I think I should stress that at the moment he is some way off this level, but even though he is 25, we have seen central midfielders develop later on throughout their mid-20s and become top-level players. Marcos Senna won the FIFA Club World Cup in 2000 with Corinthians after winning the Brazilian League title the season before. He only moved to Europe in 2002, aged 26, with Villarreal signing the Brazilian, and at that point the club were relatively a minor attraction outside of Spain. However, after a third place finish in the 2004-2005 La Liga season, Villarreal would qualify for the Champions League, and the following season they would make the semi-finals, only losing to Arsenal 1-0 over 2 legs, with Senna being an integral part of Manuel Pellegrini's midfield. And so in 2006, Spanish manager Luis Aragonés would give Senna the opportunity to represent Spain at the 2006 World Cup, having not yet been capped by Brazil. Senna accepted, and despite getting knocked out at the round of 16 by eventual finalist France, Senna's chances of international success wasn't over, even though he was now entering his 30s, and he was even close to moving to the Premier League after Sir Alex Ferguson had approached his agent and Villarreal over a possible move to Manchester United, with Senna having just 1 year left on his contract. However, United's advances were rejected by Villarreal, and Senna was happy to stay, signing a new 3-year extension to his contract. And from here, Senna would go on to not just become a Villarreal legend, but also a Spain legend, playing at Villarreal until 2013 and being a constant in the side throughout that period, whilst also having success with the national side, playing every game where Luis Aragonés' side won Euro 2008, with Senna playing as the lone defensive midfielder in a 4-1-3-2 alongside Xavi Hernandez, with David Silva and Andres Iniesta being used as narrow wide players either side, as Fernando Torres and David Villa played as a front two. Like McTominay in Ten Hag's 4-2-3-1, the creative burden didn't fall onto Senna, and so he was able to be the destroyer in the midfield, providing the defensive protection out of possession without having to be the player to play those incisive passes, as that was the job of Xavi and Iniesta. And so just because McTominay isn't a youngster bursting onto the scene, it doesn't mean that he still can't develop into a top level player, or at least a player capable of functioning in a top level team. And so like Senna, I do think that McTominay could be a key component in a side if the system contains the players that take the creative burden off of him, as Xavi and Iniesta did for Senna. Now at the moment, because of his recent fall, McTominay is keeping £60 million signing Casemiro out of the side, and rightfully so, as McTominay has continued his impressive performances game after game. However, I do think that eventually we will see McTominay's above average performances subside, and Casemiro gradually begin to cement himself as a first team starter in that defensive midfield position alongside Eriksen. Although even as United's third choice central midfielder behind Casemiro and Eriksen, I still think McTominay can play a pivotal role for United, as what I would refer to as a water carrier. Now the water carrier really isn't a defined role, it's more of a phrase to loosely describe what the player represents in a system. Let's say in a big game, maybe against Manchester City in the next few weeks for example, a game I am thinking of doing a tactical preview on, looking at how Ten Hag should set up the side in that game. So if you do want to see that, make sure you subscribe, click the bell and let me know in the comments. But anyway, as I was saying, in big games, Ten Hag may feel that playing Eriksen in a midfield double pivot does put a lot of defensive burden on Casemiro next to him, and so it may be wise to move to a more conventional three-man midfield with Eriksen and McTominay either side of Casemiro, with Bruno Fernandes either playing in front, creating a diamond midfield shape with Sancho and Rashford up top, or with Fernandes playing more from the right side, with Rashford starting from the left as an inside forward. The reason for this system switch would be that it would give United added defensive security and physicality in the centre of midfield, without having to trade Eriksen's ball progressing abilities from deep. You could imagine that with McTominay being used either to Casemiro's right or left, that he could play a pivotal role in tracking Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva's underlapping runs from the half space. Also, considering that he ranks in the 91st percentile for both aerial duels won and percentage of aerial duels won as well, McTominay in certain games could be used as a defensive shield, sitting deep in the midfield and using his aerial abilities to protect either centre-back or full-back against long balls from the opposition, performing a similar role to the one we saw Fellaini perform at the start of Jose Mourinho's reign, and a role that Pep sometimes used Javi Martinez in at Bayern Munich. Now whilst people may scoff at this suggestion, framing it as a defensive anti-football move, that's just nonsensical. Even the best teams in the world in history have used this type of water carrier player who is primarily there to do the dogged industrious work in the midfield. Federico Valverde is a fantastic example of this. Carlo Ancelotti uses a 4-3-3, 4-5-1 kind of system with Valverde on the right flank, not even in central midfield, as that is where Casemiro, Kroos and Modric were deployed last year in Real Madrid's Champions League victory, with Tchouaméni and Camavinga now coming into that setup. But the role of Valverde seems to be to primarily provide the athleticism, energy and high quantity of defensive actions and ball progression, and when we do look at his FB ref report, we can see this statistically. When compared against every other attacking midfielder and winger in Europe's top 5 leagues over the past 365 days, he ranks in the top 20% for passes intercepted, passes blocked, successful pressures, blocks, clearances, ball recoveries, shots blocked, percentage of aerial duels won and interceptions, showing what a defensive asset he is from a wide position. And to be honest, Valverde does remind me of McTominay, not just from a stylistic point of view, as he is a similar height and has a similar body composition, runs in a similar sort of way, but also because he excels in a lot of the same things that McTominay excels in, particularly from a defensive point of view, as McTominay also provides the energy and high quantity of defensive actions that Valverde does. And this got me thinking, could McTominay potentially be used as a defensive winger or a wide midfielder like Valverde is under Ancelotti? Because that is probably the best name for the role that Valverde plays, as it's either a defensive winger who has a specific defensive task, as Valverde had against Alexander-Arnold in the Champions League final last season, or you could say he's just more of an orthodox wide midfielder. McTominay has the same sort of defensive and physical attributes as Valverde, being also able to drive the ball forward in possession and make runs ahead of play, and being a very good striker of the ball as well. As I've said before, Ten Hag in certain games that require it could use a midfield three of McTominay and Eriksen either side of Casemiro, with Bruno Fernandes drifting infield from the right. However, alternatively he could also be used in a 4-2-3-1, as instead of playing McTominay as a central midfielder, he could use him as a wide midfielder playing from the right, allowing the use of Fernandes centrally, but still using two destructive players in that midfield five. Whilst out of possession, McTominay would retain a narrow and deep position to the right of the midfield double pivot. When the ball is on the far side, he could also shift in very narrow, creating a three-man central midfield at times and keeping the defensive shape very horizontally compact. In possession, McTominay's main role would be to receive the ball quickly after a turnover and either find a pass to start a counter-attack or drive the ball forward himself through the centre of the pitch, being the leader of the attack. And this is something that distinguishes Valverde and McTominay, as Valverde is a much better ball progressor than McTominay is. Valverde ranks in the top 20% of wingers and attacking midfielders for progressive carries, the top 10% for passes into the final third, carries into the final third, and his dribble percentage success rate, showing Valverde's top level ability to move the ball up the pitch, whilst the fact that he also ranks incredibly highly in the top 5 to 1% for nearly every pass completion metric shows he's a very reliable player, keeping possession almost every time he receives it, which can be an extremely underrated attribute to have, particularly in big games, which is why Valverde has his standout performances in these types of games, because with Real often defending deep and going without the ball for long spells of the game, having a player who is firstly going to enable you to retain possession after you win it back is going to be very valuable, but secondly also progressing the ball forward to launch counter-attacks, which then allows your forward players' individual abilities to take hold in the attack. And because Madrid have talents like Vinicius Jr., Modric and Benzema, Valverde's ability to win the ball back and do his defensive diligence and then start the attack shortly after a turnover is exactly what the Real Madrid system needs. And so Valverde's inclusion on the right over a more traditional attacking wide player like Marco Asensio or Rodrigo provides the balance that the system needs to function so efficiently against the best opposition. I think you would definitely categorise the defensive winger, wide midfielder type of role that Valverde plays for Ancelotti as a water carrier in that midfield, with Valverde not being the most technically gifted player that Ancelotti has at his disposal, but he does all the basics and fundamentals in the game to an extremely high level, which in itself is a key attribute. And I think with McTominay's simplicity sometimes being seen as a weakness in that deep central midfield position, maybe it could be a strength playing on the right flank, as it would allow Erik Ten Hag to continue with Eriksen alongside a ball winner like Casemiro and more of an inside forward from the other side on the left like Marcus Rashford, sitting in higher and wider positions than McTominay in possession, who like Valverde will motor up and down the right flank, but providing more underlaps than overlaps, as his runs in behind the back line will generally be from a deep position in the final third into a crossing position, whilst Rashford will be making diagonal runs into goal scoring positions from higher up in the middle third. I think McTominay from the right midfield position in a 4-2-3-1 could be necessary in some games, as I think particularly against Manchester City and maybe Chelsea as well, Ten Hag may see trading Antony or Sancho's attacking threat from the right for McTominay's output out of possession as a worthwhile sacrifice to make, particularly if Manchester United aren't going to be having the majority of the ball. And I think if McTominay can improve his forward passing ability, which seems to be the case from what I've seen in the last few games, along with his end product in the final third, then I genuinely think we could see him going from a player who is a liability in big games to a player who is almost a necessity, because no one else in the United team can perform this very niche role from that wide position to the same level as he can. And this type of player wouldn't be uncommon for Manchester United. Owen Hargreaves played this kind of role for Sir Alex Ferguson's 2007-2008 Champions League winners, playing to the right of Scholes and Carrick, being used as a narrow wide midfielder, allowing Ronaldo, Tevez and Rooney to retain slightly higher and wider positions when necessary. Hargreaves in this role was primarily used in big games and in the Champions League, with Ferguson switching to a more conventional 4-4-2 system with Ronaldo and either Giggs or Nani as wingers either side of Scholes and Carrick, against Premier League sides where United would control the majority of the ball. And this water carrier role was used by Ferguson frequently throughout his management career. Ji-Sung Park famously played this role more prominently when Hargreaves got injured from around 2008 up to around 2012 when he left the club. Whilst Hargreaves had the work rate paired with exceptional passing ability, Park combined his ball carrying ability with his work rate, being a bit more similar to Valverde than Hargreaves. The same could be said for Darren Fletcher, who certainly from around 2003 up to 2011-ish played as a very workmanlike midfielder, probably being in his peak from the seasons between 2009 and 2011. You could even argue that David Beckham was this type of midfielder as well, however he was definitely a level above the others due to his world-class passing and crossing abilities. In Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United side from 95 up until 2003, Beckham was used on the right side of a midfield four with Giggs on the left, either side of Scholes and Keane in the centre of the park. Like in the role of the defensive winger or wide midfielder which I applied to Valverde and McTominay, Beckham was also an extremely hard-working wide player, being diligent in his defensive work and often coming inside into a narrow position to create a vertically compact defensive shape. In possession, he also picked up positions a lot more like Valverde than more traditional wingers like Antony or Sancho, often being situated in quite central positions in the middle third and only drifting out wide in the final third, when he could then swing in one of his famous curling crosses into the box from pretty much anywhere along the right flank. Now obviously Beckham's offensive and creative output is some way above Valverde's, let alone McTominay's, but you can see how this hyper-specific role doesn't necessarily mean you can't have a player with top-level offensive qualities playing in it, as Federico Valverde still produces fantastic output in the final third, and David Beckham in his prime was probably in the top 5 best creators in all of Europe. If they have a certain level of defensive capabilities, prefer to hold a deeper, narrower position in possession, and can operate in central areas, and have a high level of defensive in 50 games in all competitions. In the treble-winning season the year after, in 98-99 he hit 9 goals and 18 assists in 55 games, in 99-2000 it was 8 game period, in 198 games he had a total of 111 direct goal contributions, which is pretty outstanding for a right midfielder who also brought a significant amount in the middle third, and from a defensive point of view as well, showing that David Beckham may be one of the most underrated former players by this current generation of football fans, largely because in my opinion, football tactics have evolved, and this kind of static winger who looks for crosses rather than to beat his man on the flank not only fell out of fashion but also became less attractive to the average football fan compared to the silky dribbling wingers like Ian Robben, Ronaldo, Messi and whoever else came through in the late 2000s. This may also be a role that would suit Trent Alexander-Arnold, as his biggest weaknesses at the moment is his defending in one-on-ones down the flank and tracking his runner around the back post in the box. Despite being somewhat of a defensive liability in certain phases of play, at the moment he offers Liverpool so much quality in possession that he still has to keep his spot at right back. However, Klopp does need to evolve this Liverpool side, not just from a personnel point of view, but maybe also tactically as well, and so potentially pushing Alexander-Arnold forward into the midfield line and bringing in a better defensive right back like Malo Gusto or Vanderson could be the way forward. This would allow Klopp to play Trent as a part of the midfield three alongside Fabinho and Thiago and drift over to the right side in possession as Kevin De Bruyne does for Manchester City, which will enable Liverpool to still utilise Trent's world-class crossing ability as a potent attacking weapon. Whilst also out of possession rather than him taking up a right back position in a back four, Trent could play as a wide midfielder in a midfield four, with Luis Diaz dropping in on the left side as Salah and say Firmino or Nunes retain higher positions, seeing Liverpool defend in a 4-4-2, and most importantly in this situation, taking the defensive burden off of Trent both positionally and in one-on-ones while still retaining his offensive qualities. And so you can see that whilst a wide midfielder or defensive winger role, whatever you want to call it, can be used in a defensive manner as with Valverde and McTominay, it could also be used to get the best out of incredibly offensive fullbacks who do have defensive faults in their game. So overall, Ten Hag has improved McTominay by taking the creative burden off of him in those deep central areas, using Christian Eriksen as the side's main ball progressor, allowing McTominay to keep his game simple and focus on what he excels at, which is his aggression and physicality, whilst he has also himself developed a greater tackling ability, seems a lot more press resistant and has shown his capabilities of playing the types of forward passes that he has definitely been lacking over the past few seasons. In the long term, whilst I do think Casemiro will take his place, McTominay is still going to feature heavily and could also be used in this water carrier role that we do see Valverde used in, either in a midfield three or as a wide midfielder. And to add on to this, as we saw with Marcos Senna, McTominay could be a late developer, and if he can continue to improve his on the ball attributes, there's no reason why he can't become an integral part of this Manchester United side for many seasons to come. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, give the video a like, check the description for more videos, and put your thoughts in the comments section as well.